Sir Charles Kingsford Smith currently is and will forever be known as the pioneer of aviation for Australia. Born on the 9th February 1897 in Brisbane, Australia, and raised in Vancouver, Canada until 1907 when his family moved back to Sydney. When World War I broke out in 1914, Kingsford Smith was keen to fight for his country, so in 1915 he enrolled into the 4th Signal Troop and the 2nd Divisional Signal Company. He served in Egypt, Gallipoli and France. In 1916 he moved to the Australian Flying Corps and then into the Royal Flying Corps. On the morning of 12th November 1917, Charles Kingsford Smith received his military cross for his efforts and fine offensive spirit and disregard of danger. Just some of the many contributions that Sir Charles Kingsford Smith made to Australian history in the 1920s. His work as a Hollywood stuntman aviator. In 1921, he was the chief pilot of Western Australian Airways and was the first airmail service that flew between Geraldton and Derby. The improvement in the mail system in Australia was only made possible by Kingsford Smith's long-distance flights. He bought a Fokker FV-113M monoplane that he named the Southern Cross, and later modified it for the long-distance flight she was about to undertake. In 1926, Charles Kingsford Smith and Charles broke the record for flying around Australia with a total time of 10 days and 5.5 hours. Kingsford Smith continued to set and break records. 1928 was a very eventful year for him. On the 31st of May, Kingsford Smith, along with his co-pilot Charles and two Americans, Jim Warner and Harry Loyne, who worked as crewmen, took off from Oakland, California, and continued their journey via Hawaii and Suva, and finally landed in Brisbane, Australia, after 83 hours and 38 minutes of travel time. This was the first time anyone had completed a non-stop flight across the Pacific. In August 1928, Kingsford Smith was the first person to fly non-stop across Australia, departing from Melbourne and arriving in Perth. Then in September of 1928, Charles Kingsford Smith completed the fly non-stop across Australia, departing from Melbourne and arriving in Perth. Then in September of 1928, Charles Kingsford Smith completed the first aerial crossing of the Tasman Sea from Sydney to Christchurch. The flight back to Sydney was also the first flight from New Zealand to Australia. In the same year, Kingsford Smith started Australian National Airways. However, after losing 2 planes in transit and with the Depression upon them, the company was closed in 1931. In 1929, Kingsford Smith and Ulm flew from Sydney to London, although there was a slight misfortune as the plane had to make an emergency landing at the far northwest of Australia, and being stranded for 10 days, the flight was rescheduled. Both Smithy and Ulm made it to England in a record time of 12 days and 18 hours. In 1932, Charles Kingsford Smith was knighted for his services to the aviation by the Governor-General Sir Isaac Isaacs. After purchasing, then in 1933, Sir Charles Kingsford Smith flew solo from London to Western Australia in a plane he named the Miss Southern Cross. After purchasing another plane named Lady Southern Cross with sponsors' money to complete a competition, the plan was cancelled as the plane's modifications were not going to be finished in time. Sir Charles and Sir P.G. Taylor flew it to San Francisco to be sold to pay back sponsors' money. When the plane wasn't sold after a year, Kingsford Smith and J.T. Pethybridge aimed to fly another record-breaking trip from London to Australia. Departing England on the 6th November 1935, the Lady Southern Cross became lost off the coast of Burma, never to be seen again. Both Charles Kingsford Smith and J.T. Pethybridge's bodies were never found. A piece of wreckage from the plane was found by 2 fishermen in the Bay of Bengal near Burma. I believe that Sir Charles Kingsford Smith was a significant individual to Australian history because he was the first man to fly across the Tasman Sea, the first to fly non-stop across Australia and the first to fly non-stop across the Pacific. He broke many records and was highly involved in 2 airlines, the Western Australian Airways and the Australian National Airways. Kingsford Smith is by far the most influential person in Australian aviation history. Anthony Fokker was once declared Kingsford Smith as the greatest man flying in the world today. Sir Charles Kingsford Smith is recognised by his face being on the old $20 note and having Sydney International Airport named after him.